What's up, guys, and welcome to the weekly Q&A. Our first question this week comes from Dason Flores, who asks for my thoughts on Alden Ehrenreich saying that he signed on for 3 Star Wars movies. Honestly, I wouldn't read too much into this at all. I mean, first of all, this isn't really new news. This sounded familiar to me, and I looked into it, and this has been talked about since July of 2016, so it's been almost 2 years that this started to come out. And also, it's just kind of common practice nowadays, especially after the MCU, for new actors in a franchise to be signed on for multiple films. If you look at Felicity Jones, she was signed on for multiple movies, and we all know that it's very unlikely we're going to see her pop up again in Rogue 2. Having multiple movies in a contract doesn't mean anything for sure. It's more Disney going, just in case. Like, if we decide to have you back, then you are contractually obligated to do so, Alden. It doesn't mean that they're planning sequels for Solo. I would be at least very surprised if that were the case. I think it's more likely that, if they were to do a Lando movie or a Boba Fett movie, they could, pull in Alden for that. It's kind of like Mark Ruffalo. He signed on for 6 Marvel movies, I think. And so far, all of his appearances have not been solo Hulk movies. He's been in Avengers and Thor Ragnarok and the end credits scene for Iron Man 3. So I think cameos is more likely if they're going to go that direction. And even that, I don't want sequels to Solo. I don't really want a Lando movie or a Boba Fett movie. I've said before, I would prefer that they do stuff more like Rogue One, where it's surrounding events and not specific characters. I think that's the better way to go. But yeah, basically what I want to say is that Esquire saying that Solo, a Star Wars story, will have 2 sequels is a huge jump of the gun. Timothy Cooley wants to know if I think the new movies are relying too heavily on the books and comics to fill in some gaps. The short answer to your question, because I feel like I'm about to ramble, is yes, sometimes I do think that. But I want to make a distinction first. I recently did a video on the Holdo maneuver and the science behind it and why it was so effective and all that. And that information came from the Last Jedi novelization. And I got a bunch of comments on that video about how, The Last Jedi is such a lazy movie. They should have explained this in the movie, and I shouldn't have to read a book to understand it. And, The Last Jedi has issues, but that's not one of them. You don't need to understand hyperspace ramming to understand the story being told in the film. That's what books are for. They're to give nerds like me the extra details that we like to read about. So I don't think that was something that needed to be said in The Last Jedi. But there are things that I think are important that have been left out in previous movies. And so now I'm going to talk about Rogue One and the book Catalyst and Rebel Rising. And just for some context, I would rank The Last Jedi 6th in my ranking and Rogue One 5th. I like it more, but I did have this little issue with it, and that was that I didn't feel like I connected with the characters all that much. There were just so many, the movie jumped around, it has a breakneck pace. It's very entertaining, but characters are also very important to me. And having read Catalyst first, I felt like I appreciated Krennic as a villain more. I cared about Galen Erso. I cared about Lyra Erso. I don't think I would have felt anything when they died in the movies if I hadn't read that book. I didn't care about Jyn Erso until I read the book Rebel Rising, which came out after the movie. And so there, for me, I felt like Rogue One failed a little bit and was relying on the books to get us to connect with these characters. And so that is problematic for me. But I think that that's all personal preference. I think that there are plenty of people that saw Rogue One and they had no problem connecting with all the characters and they have nothing more to say about it. And there are people that saw The Last Jedi and then didn't get what they wanted out of that and probably found some of it in The Last Jedi novelization. So I think it's all a personal thing. But either way, I think that the answer is yes, on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes the movies are relying on the books or the comics to fill in some, what I would consider to be important gaps. The bar band bassist asks how much connection I expect episode 9 to have with the prequel trilogy. Like you said, JJ has reportedly been claiming that he is working on tying together all 3 trilogies with episode 9. And yeah, that is a huge undertaking. I am not really expecting anything overt. I wouldn't expect like a squadron of clone troopers to appear all of a sudden. I think he's probably talking more thematically. But that said, I still really hope that we just get a full team of Force Ghosts. I would love a scene with Luke and Anakin and Yoda and Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. Let's get them all in there. I just think that would be very cool. A way to...
That's very cool. It's very cool.
Very cool.
Very cool.
Literally every time I say those 2 words together, that just flashes through my mind and it makes me have to stop. But yeah, I think that having Force Ghosts, at least Anakin, would be a really great way to kind of pull all 3 trilogies together. Alexis Almadina wants to know how I want technology to work and look whenever we inevitably explore the Old Republic era. Because I've said before that in the game Knights of the Old Republic, if you jump back 4,000 years, everything is still pretty much the same. And honestly, I don't have a good answer for you because it's a tricky thing. How do you keep that Star Wars feel, but also take technology back thousands of years? And KOTOR, they might have done it the right way on the first try. Like, I don't know if there is a better way to do it, is just make everything look cosmetically older and different, but functionally, they're pretty much the same. I don't know that there is a better way. And, like, if I'm being honest with myself, that's just a nitpick of KOTOR. It's a great story, and that's what's important. If you're telling a great story in the Old Republic era, I'm not going to care about how technology has or hasn't changed. Theory Ullman asks why some people so adamantly prefer the old EU to the new canon. I've started to look at Star Wars kind of like James Bond, and I'm not the biggest James Bond fan at all, but from what I can tell, people seem to love the Bond that they were introduced to first the most. And I think Star Wars is kind of like that, where you have your original trilogy people, and then they grow up and they get the prequels, and they hate the prequels. But the kids that were introduced to the prequels first, they love them. And then they grow up, and now we're at the sequel trilogy, and we know how divisive that's been. But I think that the kids that are being introduced to the sequel trilogy first are probably going to grow up loving them. And in the late 80s to late 90s, there was like this dead zone where there were no new Star Wars movies. So there's this whole group of people that grew up on the Star Wars EU. That may have been their first introduction. And that's their first Star Wars love. And I think they have it harder than all of the other Star Wars fans because the people that grew up on the original trilogy, it's still canon. Same with the prequels and, of course, the sequels. But the people that were growing up on the old EU and all those books, it's announced in 2014 that they're not going to play into anything going forward and that those stories are not going to be continued. They're not going to get conclusions. So I totally understand that frustration. I mean, that's rough. So that's kind of why I think people got really angry about the whole Legends thing. Personally, I was willing to make that sacrifice to get new movies, but I understand the people that fell in love with the Legends material. I understand why they would feel that way and like claim that as their canon. And I think that's fine to do. If that's what you prefer, like keep going with it. And it sucks that you're never going to get those storylines finished. But I mean, maybe like write some fan fiction. I feel like people look down on fan fiction, but literally every Star Wars story now is being made by people who grew up loving Star Wars. Like they're fans. So your stories are just as valid. Like if you want to get some closure, honestly, try writing some fan fiction for yourself. But I do honestly feel for all of those people that grew up on the EU and just love it to death. It is a rough situation to be in. That's it for Patron Questions. If you're a patron and you didn't see your question answered here, just head over to Patreon where I left you a written response. I actually had someone last week ask if I answer all of my patron questions, and yes, if you leave a comment on our weekly Q&A thread, I will reply with a written response to everyone, and I choose 5 to answer in this video. If you're not a patron, you can learn more by following the link in the description. Just $1 a month will get you access to extra Star Wars Explained content, like audio commentaries for the films or roles in my Discord server, and the combined donations really go a long way in supporting the channel. On to YouTube questions. Memosaurus Rex asks if people ever get jet lag from hyperspace. That is an interesting thought, and it makes sense. But I would guess no. I mean, hyperspace is just a tool to get us from one planet to another very quickly. So I don't think that that's ever going to be some storytelling device. But again, it does make sense. So I'll just guess that since hyperspace is technically another dimension, that maybe something about traveling through that fixes the jet lag. Or maybe someone just made like a magic jet lag fixing pill that works in the Star Wars galaxy, so you never have to worry about it. Star Wars Network wants to know if I agree with Mon Mothma demilitarizing the New Republic. Interesting timing since I just covered that in a video, but I will give you my opinion on it now, and no, I don't. I think that her intent was noble. I think she was trying to break the cycle of violence, and that's a theme in a show that I love, Battlestar Galactica, like this. All this has happened before, and all of it will happen again, unless someone steps up and tries to break the cycle. And I think that works very well for Star Wars too, because the Star Wars galaxy is constantly at war, hence the name. So I think Mon Mothma was just trying to be the one to stop it. Again, a noble pursuit, but she could have gone about it in a much smarter way. If you're going to do that, do it much more gradually, because there's a huge power vacuum after the Empire leaves and you get these criminal syndicates starting up a shadow war, and they're an actual threat when they shouldn't be, but their forces combined match your now heavily demilitarized forces. And also, if you're going to demilitarize, keep an eye on the Empire/First Order. I mean, you can't follow them because they went into the unknown regions and they're the only ones that charted safe passage and all, but just remember they're out there. And I'm never going to understand why the entirety of the New Republic fleet was at Hosnian Prime. I mean, I really liked The Force Awakens, but I am never, ever going to like Starkiller Base, aka the reset button of the galaxy. Crackerjack501 asks if discount lightsabers existed. Actually, yes, there was something in Star Wars Legends called a light foil, and they were basically knockoff lightsabers that were similar in technology built by non-force sensitives. Also, in the book Scoundrels, also Legends, there's a character who has a lightsaber that's like not quite working. Han refers to it, I think, as a light butter knife, and I think that was once a lightsaber. It was just damaged and not working properly, but yeah, the answer to your question is yes. Arthur Wang wants to know if I hear Morrison or Baker's voice whenever I read Clone Trooper dialogue. Yeah, I hear Baker's voice, and that's thanks to the Clone Wars and just hearing the clones over and over again. It's basically what Battlefront 2 did. That's how it works in my mind. If it's a clone trooper, I hear Baker's voice. If it's Boba Fett or Jango Fett, I hear Morrison's voice. Zandy Boy asks if there is an overload of Stormtrooper variants in the new movies. I don't really think so. I mean, I will admit that when Rogue One was coming out and we were seeing the Shore Trooper and the Death Trooper, like, part of me goes, well, where were they in the original trilogy? But the more I think about it, it's no different from Star Wars Legends, which had a ton of Stormtrooper variants. It just feels like it's more in your face because they're in the movies. They are in your face. But, you know, I like it. I like the new designs. I like the specialization. And I know some people are always like, oh, they're just doing it to sell toys. And I'm like, yeah, so? Like, no one's forcing you to buy them. I think they look cool. So, yeah, I'm all for it. That's all the time I have for questions today. If you want to leave a question for next week's video, just put it in the comments below or sign up for Patreon to join our weekly Q&A discussion. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.